Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf Ayin Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by Anna Mosowski for the refuah shlema of her mother-in-law, Terry Mosowski. She's currently surrounded by family and friends from Renana and around the world who love her and are praying for her difficult journey. She has always been a beacon of warmth who delights all who meet her, and I count myself truly blessed to have her as my mother-in-law. Thank you, and I love you. Okay, we're going to get started with a quick review. We're in the middle of the part of the Mishnah, and this is going to take us till the end of this section, which we're going to finish up today, and move on to a new Mishnah about if a bone was broken. Okay, we talked about if the bone is broken. This is what we call an Aver Hamidul Dal, or is it an Aver Hamidul Dal, right? If the bone is broken and it's surrounded with a majority of flesh, which then we saw after the Mishnah, it said flesh. The Gemara had brought a braita which said it could be flesh and skin. And then we discussed, what's the ratio? That was the very end of yesterday's daf. Does it have to mostly meat, a little bit of skin, or can it be some sort of equal combination? Can it be only the hide? Does that work? Okay, we had all these questions about that. Anyway, but if it's covered by the majority, then we assume it's going to heal, and therefore it's considered connected completely to the animal. Will be covered by the shechita, for example, right? It's not an Aver Midul Dal, not considered separate. And it's certainly not Aver Min hachai, right? And that's why it's covered by the shechita, etc. We're going to start with a story. Hanu Gidin, there was a case that happened, not exactly a story, but it was a case where there were Gidim, there were Gidim Rakim. There were soft sinews. De'atu l'kamei Rava. Okay, it says Rava. We're going to see from later in the story, most of the commentaries switch it to Rava, because Rava appears later with a question, and it seems like it's connected, that this was Rava speaking. So the case came up. What was the case? They don't really tell you, but since we're in the sugya, it's obvious what it's about. And Rashi explains and helps us in case it wasn't obvious to us, which is there were sinews that were combined with the flesh around this bone that was broken. So you didn't have enough meat to say the flesh to cover the majority, but the flesh with the sinews was enough. So the question is, does soft sinews count? Amar Rava, l'may nichushle. Yeah, what's the problem? And he basically says, if you want to say this is the problem, it's not. If you want to say this is the problem, it's not. So what do you say? Chada, firstly, the Amar Rabbi Yochanan, gidin shesofan la'akshot, nibnim alehem bePesach. There's a shita of Rabbi Yochanan in Masechet Pesachim, which says that if you have soft sinews for the Korban Pesach, in other words, let's just go back to the Korban Pesach. Everybody needs to be registered for the Korban Pesach. And we have to know that we have enough meat for everyone to eat in olive bulk. Now, if there wasn't enough, and we all register, and this one, we count up, and one person's going to end up with sinews, that's enough, that's fine. You can still register to eat the sinews of the Korban Pesach. So what if they're soft? So what do you see here? Soft sinews are like the flesh. It's like the meat. Okay, if it works for Korban Pesach, it should be fine. Ve'od, and furthermore, HaTorah chasa al mamonan shel Yisrael. Very powerful statement. We've seen it a whole bunch of times. The Torah has mercy on our money. Okay, we don't want to be throwing away animals and say, maybe you have to worry it's not kosher. No, this bone is broken, but it's covered with the flesh and the sinews. That together makes up the majority. Then let's permit it. Okay, so where we can, we should. That's what he's basically saying. I'm a Rav Papa Rava, but comes Rav Papa and he says to Rava, what are you talking about? Number one, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. What happened to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish's position? He disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan there in Pesachim and doesn't consider them meat. Number two, Isura Doraita. If this, first of all, what's the Isura Doraita? So they say it's a treifa. Why is it a treifa? Well, remember, if it's broken above the arkuva, above that spot, if it's broken and there's not a row of the meat, then surrounding this bone, we're going to consider the animal a treifa. Okay, or even maybe if it's an Aver Midul Dal, it's also Aver Min hachai. Okay, these are Doraita issues. You can't just say, look, we have mercy on the money of people and we don't want to throw away their animals unnecessarily, but if it's a concern, it's a Torah prohibition. How can you just permit it? In other words, whether there's rove or not affects whether we're going to call this a treifa or not call it a treifa, and that's Isur Doraita, or whether we call it Aver Min hachai or not. So he says, and you're saying, what are we concerned about? Like as if, who cares? I can easily matir this. And he says, I'll give you 2 reasons why you shouldn't. Ishtik, Rava was silent. So now the question is, why was Rava silent? I mean, he had Rabbi Yochanan to rely on. Amai ishtik. V'hama Rava, and not only did he have Rabbi Yochanan to rely on, but this is why the commentaries think this is Rava, because Rava himself said, Hilchata kavateda Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish bahane tlat. This is interesting. Out of all the machlokot, we learned this in Yevamot, but you probably don't remember. Of all the machlokot of Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, we see many, many of them, almost as many as Abai and Rava, we always hold like Rabbi Yochanan, except for 3 cases. Rashi lists what they are. I'm not going to go into them. B'kinyan perot, choletz lemuberet, and matana be'emtza. That you can find them all in Yevamot and Daf. Lamed Vav. In Daf Lamed Vav of Yevamot, you can find them. Anyway, he said, in all these areas, we always pass like Rabbi Yochanan. And if Rava said that, that's what we're assuming. They're quoting Rava because it's Rava talking. So it doesn't make any, right? Now, we understand, he said we always pass like Rabbi Yochanan. So why does it matter what Reish Lakish said? This isn't one of the 3 cases. To which they answer, Shanehacha de Hadr be Rabbi Yochanan legabe de Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. We know that Rabbi Yochanan changed his mind and held in the end, like Reish Lakish's position in Pesach. How do we know it? From a completely different case, which is in, we're going to actually see it later in Chullin, but a completely different case where he says, we're talking there about whether soft, it's the soft skin that's, I think, on the head of a calf, but I forget. I think it's the head of a calf. When the soft skin on the head of a calf can be considered like the flesh, and they say, because what is it? This is just like the gidim. They're soft now. I think I forgot to translate these words. Gidin shesofan lakshot. They're soft now, but later they'll harden. So right now you can eat them, even though later they won't. And that was what the whole machloket was about. Do you go by what they are now, or do you go by what they're going to be in the future? So Rabbi Yochanan in that sugya said, we're going to go by what they are now, and we're going to say you can view this as meat. But in the case of the hide, he wanted to know, is it susceptible to impurity? Things become susceptible to impurity only if they're considered food. We're going to revisit this later today, so keep it in your mind. Only if it's considered food can it be susceptible to impurity. I mean, there's other things that can be susceptible to impurity, but if we're talking about animal stuff, when the animal's alive, remember, it's not. Only when it dies, because then it's food. But the hide is not really food. But if it's this soft hide that you could theoretically eat, then we could say it's susceptible to impurity. So Rabbi Yochanan says if it's going to eventually become susceptible to impurity, if it's going to eventually harden, Rabbi Yochanan says it's not susceptible to impurity. This hide on the head of the animal. Now, then they bring a difficulty on Rabbi Yochanan from a Mishnah. And you're just missing a lot of words here in the Gemara, so I have to fill in. And then we get to our line in the Mishnah. When Reish Lakish actually raised this difficulty on Rabbi Yochanan to his position, and Rabbi Yochanan said, Da'amar le, al takniteni, don't raise questions against me from that Mishnah, which seems to imply soft hide would be susceptible to impurity, because bilshon yachid ani shoneota, I claim that Mishnah was an individual's opinion. It wasn't the majority position. And therefore, don't ask me questions from that Mishnah, because I don't think that Mishnah represents the majority opinion. And then what do you see? That hide that is soft, but eventually will get hard. Rabbi Yochanan views it as if it's hard and it's not food for susceptibility to impurity. From there, you can assume that he must have changed his position about these sinews, because he would say the same thing about sinews. Sinews and hide, they're both the same. If they harden, you can't eat them. If they're soft, you can eat them. But if they're soft, but they're going to eventually harden, then we're going to view them as if they're not. And that must be why Rava was silent in the end, because he realized, I guess you're right. Rabbi Yochanan really ended up agreeing with Reish Lakish, and end of story. Okay, so Rava wanted to permit, Rav Papa questioned him, and Rava gave in, and we gave an explanation as to why Rava gave in. We don't really know why Rava gave in, but we're guessing. Okay, another situation that happened, Nishbar ha'etzem v'yatza lachutz d'ishtaka kortita mine. So we have a bone that came out of position. It's still there. And it was obviously, otherwise there wouldn't be a question, covered with majority of hide and meat or just flesh or something. But ishtakil kortuta mine, but a small piece of the bone fell out completely, broke off and fell out. Okay, so we have this broken bone surrounded with the majority, but some of it completely disconnected from the animal. Ata l'kamed Abaye comes for Abaye. Shahaya tlata rigle. We've seen this before. He pushed them off 3 holidays, 3 regalim. That is, he didn't want to answer the question. Obviously, as we said last time we had this, obviously it means they didn't have the question anymore because the meat, they didn't have freezers and ways to preserve it. Obviously the meat was, gone, and he didn't answer the question. Amarle Rav Ada bar Matna, Zil Kameh de Rava Berei de Rav Yosef bar Chama. So Rav Ada bar Matna says to them, listen, you really want an answer to this question? Right? Last time we had to say they probably wanted an answer in case this were to happen again, okay, because it wasn't relevant anymore. But if you really want an answer, go to Rava, the son of Rav Yosef bar Chama, Decharifa Sakine, because he is sharp as a knife. Okay, it's funny they're using knife here in the language of shchita and all that, but right, this is the biggest offense to Abaye, right? Go to your big opponent, Rava. This is the Rava that we know of. Okay, he says, Abaye is not giving you an answer. Go to Rava and ask him. So they got before Rava. Okay, our second sugya with Rava today. Amar michti nishbara etzem yatzal chutz tnan. Or it should be Tanya. Mali nafal, mali ite. He says, let's go back and look at that braita we quoted yesterday. He didn't say yesterday, but I'm saying we quoted it in the end of yesterday's daf. That was where we added in the or basar. Okay, but the point being that there he says, if nishbar etzem v'yatzal lachutz, and it's jutting out somewhat like this one, okay, then what does it say? As long as it's covered majority with the flesh and the hide, it's fine. So he says, what's the difference if some of the bone falls or some of the bone doesn't fall? This is still the same case. Shouldn't matter. Mali nafal, what's the difference if it falls? Mali ite, what's the difference if it's still intact? It's all the same. So this case, Rava permits it. In the previous case, he tried to permit, but in the end, Rav Papa wouldn't let him. Amalei Ravina LaRava. Now we get a series of questions. This will take us to the end of the section about all sorts of unique cases of meat, of the flesh and maybe even the hide together, right, covering the surface. So we said if it covers the majority of we had 2, either the hekef, the circumference, or the thickness of the bone, but it's basically covering the majority, but in some weird something. So we're going to see a few questions. And we actually had questions like this very similar in a different case in Elu Treifot of something else, but you'll see the same questions. Mitlaket mahu. What if the meat surrounding the bone is not all in one place, like the majority it goes around in a circle, but it's a spot here, a spot there, a spot there. Altogether, though, it constitutes a majority. Or mitroses mahu. What if, excuse me, what if it thinned out? Okay, it was not a thick layer of flesh, but very thin. Mit masmes mahu. What if it got disgusting or rotten? Hechidami mit masmes. What are we calling rotten here? Rav Yoshua. Kol sharofe kodro. If the doctor would come and say we have to peel this off because it rotted or decayed, so that would be a good example. That would be a case that we would know it's mit masmes. So what's the halacha? Okay, we don't have an answer here. Ibayelu, they asked again, nikev mahu. What if it gets a perforation in it? Rashi says without it like missing a chunk. Remember we talked about different perforations where it's just perforated, but not necessarily missing a piece of it. Niklaf mahu. What if it peels away, meaning the meat is no longer attached to the bone? Nisdak mahu. What if it has a crack in it? Nital shlisha takton mahu. What if the third, okay, like let's say the meat is this thick, okay, a third of the thickness that's around the bone is no longer intact. Okay, so again, it's detached from the bone, but it's around it still. So, what's the halacha? So they try to answer here, Tashma, Damar Ulam, Rabbi Yochanan, or Hareu Kebasal. If they say the hide is like basar, then if you can use the hide instead, now the hide is usually not attached, right? Because there was usually flesh in between. There's no flesh, but there's hide. So obviously, you see, it doesn't need to be actually physically attached to it. To which the Gemara says, no, that's not a proof. Dilma de kanamash chadide. Could be a case where the hide is actually up against the bone. There's some cases where there is no meat there. Okay, there's some areas of the body where the skin touches and is directly attached to the bone. And maybe when they say the hide, maybe they mean only if it's attached and not detached. And then we don't have an answer to our question. So we're left with that. Okay, more one more thing. Amar Rav Ashi, Kivina be Rav Papi Ibayalam. When I was in Rav Papi's yeshiva or house or whatever it was, I was with him. Ibayalam, they asked him the following question, probably in his Beit Midrash. Nikdar kimin tabat mahu. What if you have a ring around it? So you have this flesh, and where the bone is attached to the body, right, where it's broken there, it's detached from the body, I should say. There's a ring around the top of empty space where the flesh is no longer. And now the problem is that the flesh can't connect with the flesh of the body to kind of heal, or maybe it can, maybe it can't, and that's the question. So do we view this as, oh, it will heal, or do we say no, if you have a complete ring around it where it's empty, specifically in the place where it would connect to the body, that would be a problem. So the answer, upashat nameha, and I answered it, and as when I was at Rav Papa's Beit Midrash, they asked this question, I answered it. To Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, davar zeh sha'alti, there's a good line, lachachamim v'larofim. This I asked the wise men, and, right, the chachamim, and I also asked the doctors. Bamru, and what did the doctors say? Misarto be'etzem u'maleh rucha. Take a bone, make a little indentation, like a scratch in it, and then it will start to heal itself. That will start the healing process. So even though you're missing the flesh here, that will cause a regeneration, and this flesh will start growing again. Aval parzela, but use a bone, don't use barzel, don't use iron or something like that, because mizraf zarif, that's going to make holes in it, ruin it, it's not going to work if you do it with that. You have to be, I guess, more gentle with it, and use a bone, and don't use that. Amar Rav Papa, v'hu dekana garma didei. Rav Papa, though, says this is only if you start to see flesh growing on the bone. There has to be some indication that this is actually going to that the flesh is going to regenerate. If you don't have that, then it isn't going to work. Okay, so you see this combination of doctors and rabbis kind of answering this question. Okay, that's it for this section. So this section was basically all sorts of questions in cases where the bone is broken and there's flesh with something else maybe, right? Do the sinews work to get to the majority? What if it's in certain positions, right? Certain things. What if the bone fell out? We said not a problem. Well, if some of the bone fell out, it's completely detached. And then we had all these questions with what if there's a crack in it? What if there's a this? What if it's in different places? What if it's, okay, all those different questions. We didn't really answer most of them. Okay, new Mishnah. Now we're going to talk about placentas. Hashochet et habema umatza b'shiliyah. If you slaughter an animal and you find a shiliyah inside, you find a placenta. Nefesh hayafa tochlena. Nefesh hayafa is what we call a euphemism, okay? Lashon sagin nahor. It's a way of saying, if you really could care less and you're not disgusted by anything, so go ahead and eat it. In other words, nobody really eats placentas. But the fact is, okay, if you really want to, and if you're not grossed out by it, you can eat a placenta. Because, now in what case are we talking about? Well, a placenta, we assume, we're going to talk about this, has a vlad inside. Could have a fetus inside. Well, the placenta that's inside, it's found in an animal that was slaughtered, we're back to ben pikua. If the animal was slaughtered and inside you find a fetus, so you can eat the fetus. Likewise, if you find a shiliyah, placenta, you can eat the placenta. Okay? They're kind of saying, I wouldn't really recommend it because it's kind of disgusting, but if you have no problem with that, well then go for it. However, because placenta isn't really food, so we're back to tumat ochlin, right? Animals are not food are not susceptible to impurity unless we view them as food. So eina mitameh lo tumat ochlin, it's not going to have tumat ochlin, and lo tumat nevelo. If the animal were to die with this placenta inside, it's not going to have the impurity of a nevela. Now, obviously, you can't eat it, but it's not going to carry impurity because it's not considered food. Only the parts of the animal that are food are considered a nevela. So we don't view this placenta as food. However, it's covered by this heter of the ben pekua if it's inside. Now we get to one other issue about this before we get to some other case. B'chishev aleha, if you decide you want to eat this placenta, then actually matame tumat ochlin, avalo tumat nevela. So tumat ochlin, now tumat nevela is just tumat nevela. It is no matter what. Either it's an animal that died and it's food and it's going to be considered nevela or not. But tumat ochlin, now what does that mean? If it gets wet, let's say a liquid comes upon it and then something that's tummy touches it, like a person who is a tamei mate touches it, they'll pass on impurity. So that passes on to foods. But it won't pass on to a placenta unless you plan to eat it. If you decide it's food, we've talked about this many times, like if you decide a vessel, even though it's not ready yet, it's ready enough for you, like you're making a mug and you didn't put the handle on, but you don't care, like you'll drink your mug without the handle on it. So that's already a vessel for you, or something like that, okay? That might be even for anyone, because it really is a vessel. But, if it's unfinished, but you decide you're going to use it for something, even if it's not the original purpose it's supposed to be meant for, but you decide you're going to use it for something, it can be susceptible to impurity. So this shiliyah, this placenta, if you decide you're going to eat it, it turns it into food to become impure of something. Again, a series of things have to happen. It has to get a liquid upon it, and then someone has to touch it, or something has to touch it, etc. Now we're going to talk about a shiliyah sheyat stamik tzata. Just like we had the fetus, remember if the head comes out, then whatever part of the body is left inside is not covered by the ben pekua, because the fetus is considered already born once the head comes out. Well, because of that, this shiliyah, this placenta that comes out, could have a fetus inside, could have the head of a fetus inside. So if a little bit of it comes out, what happened, right? It's a miscarriage, basically. And then, right, we assume there could be part of the head in there. And if the head is in there, if a little bit comes out, it could be the head is in there. And if the head is in there, it means the animal was born, right? The fetus came out already. In which case, what's inside is not permitted by the ben pekua anymore. So as soon as the shiliyah comes out a little bit, then the whole thing is asura b'achila. It's not covered by this law of ben pekua. Because siman v'la b'ishas, v'siman v'la b'beima, both in humans and in animals, the placenta could carry a live baby. Okay? Or not a live baby, but it could be, right? It has a fetus inside it. Okay. Now we're going to talk about later in the Gemara, I'll already kind of tell you that there's going to be a question, what if there's a placenta and there's a fetus? Then can you assume that the placenta went with that fetus? So let's say there's a fetus inside and there's a placenta that's partially inside, partially out. You don't have to worry the head's in there because the head is the fetus, right? That fetus goes with that placenta. Or maybe you have to worry, maybe that fetus went with a different placenta, which got dissolved somewhere, and this placenta has a fetus that didn't make it, and maybe it did come out. So we're going to talk about that in the Gemara. Okay, next case in the Mishnah, different case entirely, but it has to do with the shiliyah placenta, so they're going to talk about it. Hamivakeret. We have an animal who's about to give birth to her firstborn animal. So the firstborn animal is sanctified usually. So if he pila shiliyah, now you would assume this is going to say, right, if she miscarries a shiliyah, there's a concern that was her firstborn, in which case it has sanctity to it because it came out of her body, right? It becomes sanctified on the way out. Yashlichena leklavim, but actually it doesn't have sanctity. Throw it to the dogs. Okay, why is that? We're going to get to it in the Gemara. We're going to see. Well, it's a percentage game. Not all animals are going to be firstborns because if they're female, they're not. And if there's some reason, there's always a few reasons why it can't be a bechor. So if you take away like a 1 or 2% chance, let's say 2% chance that it's not a bechor because there's some issue, which we'll talk about in the Gemara, that removes 2%. You're left with 98% chance that it could be a bechor. Take away 48%, half of that's female, you're left with 48%. So chances are, right, the majority says that it's not a bechor. Okay, the majority of animals born to, basically the way I say it, the majority of animals born to this mivakeret, this animal about to give birth to her first animal, are not actually ra'oi to be bechorim. And if in this case you didn't see whether it was male or female, so you can assume it goes by the majority and it can be thrown to the dogs. However, b'mukdashim, if it was an animal that was sanctified for a sacrifice, and then the animal born also goes for a sacrifice, tikaver, then it has sanctity to it if the shiliyah comes out, because females can be used for sacrifices as well, for certain ones, but there are definitely ones like shlamim, for example, that can be used for female animals. So then, even though there's a small percentage that can't be used for sacrifices, in this case, they can be. Okay, now we get to a really interesting topic. It's actually the topic of flashback this week of Shula Mishkan. Ve'en kovlino tabe parashat drachim. You can't bury this placenta in an intersection. Okay, ve'en, which was basically used as a superstitious way of basically skula, you could call it, so that there aren't other miscarriages. Okay, so they would bury these placentas that miscarried in these intersections to prevent future miscarriages. Ve'ein tolin ota be'ilan, and don't hang it on a tree, which we'll see what it would do that if they had an unhealthy tree or something like that. Mipnei darchei ha'amori, because this is practices of the Gentiles, and this is not what we do. We don't do this, okay? Rashi even calls this nichush. We talked about that before, where you say, if I do this, something will happen, right? You believe that it's going to happen. And this is superstitions. We don't believe in superstitions. You can't do those things. Okay? And it's superstitions that are common customs among non-Jews, and that makes it problematic. Okay, very interesting topic. Like I said, you can read more about it in Chullin Mishkan, and we're going to get to more of it at the end of today's daf and beginning of tomorrow. So, Gemara starts off, Menane Milei. What's the source for the fact that the Shiliyah is covered by the Ben Pekua? What source are we going to use, if not the one that teaches us about a Ben Pekua in general? Ditanu Rabbanan, Kol Behema Bebehema Tochelu. Remember the animal in the animal. And it says Kol. What is Kol? All. All comes to include. Remember we said Behema Bebehema. Remember this was taking the beginning of the pasuk and the end of the pasuk, and as if the other words weren't there, right? And the animal in an animal. So that meant fetus. And now we're going to say all things that are animals in an animal. L'rabot teshiliyah. That includes the placenta. Yachol afilu yatsa miksata. You might say, what if only a little, even if a little came out, maybe we still can eat what's inside, which we know we can't. Talmud lomar ota, because it says ota tochelu. This you can eat, it you can eat. Ota velo shiliyata, and that comes to exclude a case of a placenta. Anyway, the Gemara now asks, Michti ein shiliyah belovla lama likat. Well, if we assume that the shiliyah, what's the issue with the shiliyah, both to permit and not to permit, right? In the case we permit, the case we don't permit, is all because we assume there's a vlad inside. Well, in which case, I don't need a pasuk for that. I don't need a drasha kol bebema. I just say that is a bema, because the whole issue of a shiliyah is we're ruling as if this placenta has a vlad inside, because ein shiliyah below vlad, right? Non isha, right? Siman vlad b'isha, siman vlad bebema. We assume there's a vlad in there, therefore it's a vlad. Then I don't need a special pasuk to darshan this. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Akras machta ba'almahu. Okay? It's just a mnemonic. It's just a way to remember. It's just they connected it to the verse. It's not really derived from the verse. You're right. A shiliyah equals a vlad. So whatever is true for a vlad is true for a shiliyah. If the vlad is covered by the law of Ben Pekua, so is a shiliyah. Ve'ena mitama. Okay. Now we want to deal with this line. It said in the Mishnah, it doesn't have tumat ochlin. So because of this topic, we're going to veer off to a different topic about tumat ochlin by Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nafcha, or chamor sheshlako mahu. If you take the skin of a donkey and you cook it, now, mahu, what's the halacha? Okay, so the Gemara asks, what's the halacha in terms of what? Lemai. Ila tumat ochlin, if you want to say, is it mitame tumat ochlin? Okay, obviously no one's eating the hide of a donkey. Okay, besides it's not food, it's also not kosher. But what they want to know is, the fact that you cooked it up, does that mean it's now edible, and therefore it could be susceptible to impurity? But ila tumat ochlin, if that's what your question is, tanina, it already teaches us in the Mishnah, which we'll see in a moment. Turning now to Amabet. Ila tumat nevelo, if you want to ask, when the animal dies, let's say it died on its own, and then you cooked up the hide, does it actually bring upon tumat nevela? You might have said before didn't have tumat nevela because it's not meat. Remember we said the nevela is only, right, this relates to what we were talking about in the Mishnah. Tumat nevela is only on food. This wasn't food until you cooked it. Once you cook it, maybe it kind of brings in the tumat nevela because it came from an animal that died. So if that's your question, also tanina, there's already a Mishnah about this. So tumat ochlim, where do we get this from? And now we're going to see the sources. Detanya, as it says in a Braita, ha'or v'hashiliyah. Now we're going to see, right, this is similar. Or and shiliyah, so hide and the placenta. Ein mitamim tumat ochlim. However, there's exceptions for each of these. Or sheshlako, v'hashiliyah shechishev aleha, which was our Mishnah. Okay, again, we're not here because of the shiliyah, but you see how these two are compared, and that's why obviously the sugya brought it. So if you cook up, or you boil it, or a shiliyah that you decided you wanted to eat, mitamim tumat ochlin. So there's your answer. Yes, it would be susceptible to impurity. Tumat nevelo nani tanina. Also tumat nevelo, we have a source, a Tanaitic source about it. What is that? Bin nivlata, right, where it talks about if an animal dies, and right, asher hi lechem ochla, an animal you can eat, hanogea b'nivlata yitma erev. So bin nivlata means the carcass, meaning the food of the carcass. V'lo ba'or, v'lo ba'atzamo, v'lo b'gidim, v'lo b'karnayim, v'lo b'tzfafayim. Okay, it doesn't include the hide. It does. So here the answer is no, it's not included. Okay, now, but we don't know yet if it's cooked, so just wait. It doesn't include the hide. It doesn't include the bones. It doesn't include the sinews. It doesn't include the horns, and it doesn't include the tzlafayim. Those are the hooves. Va'amar Rabbi Bar of Chana. Rabbi Bar of Chana says, Lo nitzracha ela sha'asa'an sikei k'dera. This is if you made them into this crunchy stuff at the burnt stuff at the bottom of the pot, meaning if you cooked it up. And now we see, there's our answer. It's the way Rabbi Bar of Chana explains this Mishnah, that it's talking about cooked hide, and there you see, it's not nevela, even if you cook it up. So anyway, what's the question then? To which they go back, and they go to the first option, and they say, Lo olam tuma ochlim, we're really talking about tuma of food. V'shane, and we said, but it's obvious, or shashlako, it said, it's tuma ochlim. I said, no, or chamor is different, and that's why specifically the question was about a donkey. You might have thought, like, why are they asking about the or of a donkey specifically? Shane or chamor de mais. Or chamor is really disgusting. So because it's disgusting, and you cooked it up, so it's true, it theoretically could be eaten, but maybe it's so disgusting that maybe it won't be susceptible to impurity, because who on earth would eat it? It's so gross. So that was the question. In the end, we don't have an answer, and we're left with the question. Now, I told you we're going to have a machloket, and now we're going to have a double machloket. Why do I mean double? We're going to have two versions of the machloket between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan about finding a placenta when you also find the fetus. Okay? So the placenta goes out, and then you find a fetus inside. So the question is, can you assume the placenta went with that fetus? Or do you have to worry that maybe this placenta went with another fetus that's gone and inside the placenta and the head went out with it, right? Which would mean at this point you can't eat whatever the placenta's inside. And maybe the placenta of the fetus that's inside got dissolved somewhere and we can't find it anymore. And then we're worried there's two, and then it would be a problem because as soon as one part of the placenta goes out, you have to worry the head's in there. If we say clearly this placenta went with this fetus, then if part of the placenta went out, the rest of the placenta that's inside is covered, because the only reason we said the placenta inside is a problem is because maybe the head came out already in the placenta, and if the head came out, then it's already as if the animal was born, in which case the rest of the placenta can't be eaten because it's not covered by the Ben Pekua law, because the placenta was already born completely. But if we say the fetus is inside, then we know the head, if we say that goes with this fetus, we know the head is inside the animal, so the placenta coming out is irrelevant. Whatever's left inside should be covered by the shechita of the mother. That's the big debate. So the question is, are we worried there's another fetus or not? So Amar Rabbi Elazar, Lo shanu ela she'eni mavlad. This is only if there's no other fetus. And then you assume what came out has a head. But aval yeshi mavlad, but if there was a fetus inside, ein chosheshin levlad acher. We're not worried there were twins. Okay? We're not worried about that. So we assume the head is inside. The placenta comes out partially. The rest of it is totally permitted. So Rabbi Elazar is very lenient here. Rabbi Yochanan has the strict position. He says, Ben enim avlad, ben yeshim avlad, chosheshin levlad acher. It doesn't matter if you found a vlad inside. We assume this shliach could potentially be from a different vlad. And again, you have to say, then the head might be inside there. And the placenta of the other animal that was inside, the fetus, must have gotten absorbed somewhere. Ini, is this really true? This couldn't be right, what we just said. And that's why we're going to have a second version. Because, Rabbi Yirmiyah, lechumra amara Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Yirmiyah said that Rabbi Elazar has the strict position. He's the one who has the lenient position here, who isn't worried there's twins. Ela yitmar hach yitmar. So because of Rabbi Yirmiyah, who said Rabbi Elazar has the stricter position, we have to change it. So this must be what it said. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Now it's going to get a little bit more complicated. Now, placentas generally are connected to the fetus, right? That's usually what happens. They're connected. So, lo shanu ela she'ena kshura bavlad. You have to worry the head came out when it's not connected to the vlad. Aval kshura bivlad, ein chosheshin livlad acher. But if it's attached to the fetus, okay, then we got to assume it belongs to this fetus and there's no head inside. Rabbi Yochanan amar, anu ein lanu ela shiliyah b'lo vlad. No, we're only talking about a shiliyah without a vlad. Aval yeshim avlad, ben kshura b'vlad, ben she'en kshura b'vlad, ein chosheshin livlad acher. He says, the Mishnah is only talking about if a shiliyah comes out and there's no other fetus. But if there's a fetus, it doesn't matter whether the placenta is attached or not attached. In this case, you see Rabbi Yochanan's more mekel, he's more lenient here. He says, we're not worried there's another vlad. And that's what Rabbi Yirmiyah says, that Rabbi Elazar was the one who is more strict here. Okay, so we have a machloket between them, and then we have two different versions. Again, in the first version, Rabbi Elazar said, we're not worried about twins ever, and Rabbi Yochanan said we are. And then in the second version, we have this machloket. Does it depend if it's attached, right? If it's attached, then we'll say, oh, for sure, it goes with this, and we're not worried there's a head in there. But if it's detached, we're going to worry about a second vlad, and that's Rabbi Elazar. And Rabbi Yochanan says, as long as there's one fetus, one placenta, we assume they go together, and you don't have to worry that the head came out. There was another head inside it when it came out. Okay. Now we have a braita, Tanya Kavatei Rabbi Elazar. There's a braita to prove Rabbi Elazar in this second version. It is a bit of a strange case. Hamapelet min behemah chaya ve'of. We have a woman who miscarries a fetus that looks like some sort of creature and not human, okay, some sort of animal or bird. And with that, she miscarries also shiliyah imahen, and she miscarries a fetus. A placenta. Now, so this fetus that looks like a behemah chaya ve'of doesn't have impurity of a birth. It's not considered a birth because it wasn't a human. Okay, a woman has to, let's go through the rules again. If she has a male or miscarries a male, then 7 days she's considered impure. The next 33 days, it's called dam tohar. Any blood she has is pure blood, meaning she can go to the mikvah, she's fine, she just can't go to the temple. If it's a female, 14 days. Okay, if she's not sure male or female, then she has to worry about the 14 days. And 66 days of dam tohar. Now, if she's not sure if it's male or female, we do the chumras of both. 14 tamei days. This is all going to be good preparation when we get to nida soon. And then we're going to do only, up to date 40 now, only, so 26 days of dam tohar, because we're going to be strict on both ends. Any blood she sees after is going to be blood of tamei. That's if we're not sure if it's male or female. Now, in this case, we don't know. Was the placenta from a different baby, okay, and it was maybe male or female? Or was it from this min behemah chaya ve'of, which you wouldn't need anything really, okay? So, you wouldn't have dam leida of, the tuma dam leida, the impure dam leida, because it wasn't considered a birth. So, what happens? So she's got these two miscarriages here, which could be one, could be two. So now we're going to see just like Rabbi Elazar, which is the more machmir position. Bizman shekshura behen en chosheshin livlad acher. If the placenta was attached to this fetus that she miscarried, that looked like an animal, well, we don't have to worry there was another one, and basically she doesn't have to do anything. Ein hakshura behen, but if it wasn't attached, hareini matil aleh chomer shtei vladot. We have to worry that maybe she had a regular vlad, or maybe she had this behemah vlad, and maybe she had both. And then what would we do? So what are the chumras of both? Here's interesting. 14 days of impurity, in case it was a female, in case there was a real birth, and it was female, and no days of dam tohar, because if it was an animal, then any blood she sees is a problem because of, blood, and there's no exemption here of blood being dam tohar. Shani Omeo, because why is she worried about shtei vladot? This is what we said before, but we didn't see it in the words of the Gemara before. Shemani moach shfir shel shiliyah. Maybe the vlad of this shiliyah, the fetus of the shiliyah that came out, the placenta that came out, was swallowed up, is basically dissolved inside the shiliyah. And shemani mocha shiliyah, and then there was a birth, basically a miscarriage of a birth there. Again, v'shemani mocha shiliyah to shafir. And then you have to say maybe the shiliyah, the placenta of the other one, got absorbed also, got dissolved. Okay, now we're moving on. Mivakeret she'ipila, the firstborn, that now she's about to have her firstborn, but then it turns out to be a miscarriage. So what did we say? could throw it to the dogs. Why? Why does it not have sanctity? This is what we already said, but now we'll read it inside. My time, Amar Rav Ika Bereda Rav Ami, Rov Beimot Yoldot HaDavar HaKadosh B'B'cholah. Most animals birth something that could be, used for it could be sanctified as a firstborn. Umiut Yoldot Davar She'eno Kadosh B'B'cholah. But this small minority that births something that can't be possible to be a firstborn. Mind you, what would this be? Nidme. This is when you have a sheep and it gives birth to an animal that looks more like a goat than a sheep. Okay? If it looks more like a goat, it's not a bechor. Okay? That's a rule. So let's say 2% of births are like that. We're down to 98%, right? And then we say 50-50 male-female. So that gets us down 48, right? Of the 98 that's left, 48%. It's 49. It's a woman. It's a female. 49. It's a male. And then we say smoch miuta lenidme lemechza denidme. We take the miut of the nidme, the 2% there, lemechza denekevot, and then half are females. V'havalus chari miuta, and then the males are a minority. Ubemukdashim tikabel. But if it was sanctified as it's a sacrifice, the mother, then the shuliyah that comes out can't be. First of all, it can't go on the altar. It's not an animal, but it can't be thrown to the dogs. You have to bury it. Excuse me. It has sanctity. My taima, ruba bar mikdashu. Right? Most animals that are born could be sacrifices, as we said before, because you can use the female as shlamim. And there's a few who are blemished and whatever else, but that's not a concern here because it's not the majority. Excuse me for a minute. Now we're going to end with the Drachei Amori, the superstitions. In Kovrinota, Abai v'Rava da Amre Travayu. So Abai and Rava both say, now where's the line between medicine and superstition? Okay, this is an interesting line always, right? Where does it cross over? I mean, maybe not in certain cases, but in other cases there could be some middle territory where there's a bit of a crossover, right? People believe that superstitions, things they do, are medicinal. So comes Abai and Rava and says, Kol davar sheyesh bo refuah, right? It's the second time we talked about doctors in the Gemara today, and medicine. Kol davar sheyesh bo refuah, if it will heal, and it's something, let's say, the non-Jews do for healing purposes, ein bo mishum darchei amori, then we don't have to worry. You can do like the Gentiles do, okay? If it's medicine, so go follow their medicine. That's fine. Ein bo refuah, but if it doesn't, if it's not going to heal, and it's just you believe that if you hang this, right, it's going to, bury a placenta in an intersection, right, that's not a medicinal thing that's going to help you with your miscarriage, okay, with a future miscarriage. So, ein bo refuah, yesh bo mishum darchei amori. That's the test. Okay, now, the Gemara is not saying there's a fine line here. I'm saying sometimes there could be a fine line. The Gemara is saying it's pretty clear, right? Abai and Rava are saying, if it can heal, great. If it can't heal, no. Okay? Where you draw the line there, I think, is sometimes a little tricky, right? There's some people who believe if you take certain, you drink certain things, that will help you, whether we call that medicine or not, right? It's a good question. Anyway, that's just an interesting thing to think about. I'll remind you, though, read flashback this week. So anyway, now they ask this question, we'll end here. Vahatanya, but doesn't it say, Ilan Shemashir Perotaf, if you have a tree that its fruits keep falling off the tree, so kroba sikra, you paint it red, v'toano ba'avanim, and put stones on it. Okay, this sounds a little bit like darchei amori. Okay, so the Gemara is going to say, I understand the toano ba'avanim, that could have effect. Okay, what you want to do is you want to weaken the tree so that there's less fruits on it, and then once there's less fruits, the ones that are still there should be able to grow. So that actually does something to the tree. Elas kroba sikra amai, but painting it red, what on earth could that do to help the tree, right? Painting a tree red is certainly not going to heal it. So isn't that darchei amori? And you'll have to wait till tomorrow to figure out why they would paint their trees red. Okay, so that ends our daf. We're going to go back and just review. Nishbara etzem, if it's mostly covered by the flesh, and we learned, and the ore, and maybe even sinews that are soft. Oh no, we said that's not. Okay, and then we had all different cases when it works, when it doesn't work, but basically that won't be called an Ever Meduldal if that's the case. And if we answer yes to all the questions that we asked, what if it's thin? What if it's missing in places? What if this? Okay. Then we move to the placenta. And then we talked about the placenta and how it's covered by the ben pekua, but not if some of it came out already, because maybe the head's in there. And then we had the whole debate, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yochanan, are we worried about if we find a fetus, maybe we could say for sure the head's not there, depending on the scenario and depending on what their machloket is, right? We had some different versions there. Then we talked about also it's not food, so it's not tamei ochlin. From there we got into this question about a donkey hide that you cook and you turn it into food, right? Just like the placenta, you could turn it into food by saying I want to eat it, even though most people don't. Okay, so those are all sorts of issues that came up. And then we finished with this firstborn, that again, the shiliyah from a firstborn. Do we assume, right, that doesn't have sanctity because of the percentage game that we played, but in a sacrifice it would, because again the percentage game would say majority yes would be sacrifices, so you have to treat it with sanctity. And don't bury your placentas, okay, of these miscarried placentas, don't bury them, because that is darchei amori. From there we got to trying to define what constitutes darchei amori and what doesn't. And if it's medicinal, it's not. If it isn't medicinal, it's not going to really heal you, then it is. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.